It's time for Recipe of the Day. Today's quick and easy recipe is perfect for a busy day like today. I am telling you in as short amount of time as possible how to brine chicken thighs. Now, you know that I talk about brining turkey and about brining chicken breasts, about brining all kinds of things. Chicken thighs, I really didn't think would need as much of a brine or wouldn't have as much of an impact because they are so nice and juicy and tender already. But I had tons of people asking the question in the comments for my other brining posts and on social media, times for chicken thighs, how to do it for chicken thighs. And so it was time that I tested it, and I did. I tested so many brined chicken thighs. Mostly I was doing the timing for both a wet brine and a dry brine and comparing the results of my favorite wet brine with my favorite dry brine time to see which one I like best. I will tell you that in a moment. First, what is brining? It is the process of soaking your meat in a saltwater solution before cooking it, and that brine changes the meat in 3 ways. The meat soaks up salt water more easily than it does plain water, so you're adding moisture to the raw meat. Once it's cooked, that moisture stays inside and your meat itself seems more moist. The salt being absorbed in there also changes the texture of the meat. It's a type of denaturing, so the brine meat has a more tender texture. And then, of course, you are adding salt, and salt increases flavor, right? And so you are essentially seasoning right into the meat. Where a marinade can't penetrate beyond sort of the outside edge of meat, usually, the brine can get all the way in. And if you've heard me talk about my turkey brine, if you puree other ingredients into that liquid with your salt water, that flavor will get in there. I don't find in general that just adding extra ingredients into the water, even if you boil it first and then cool it down, I just don't find that gets as in there as much as that pureeing technique. So I will link to my turkey brine for you because you've got to try that. Okay, so that is the wet brine, and my general wet brine solution is 4 cups of cool water. I've tested this with warm water. The cool water actually works better. So 4 cups of cool water with 4.5 tablespoons of Morton's kosher salt or 6 tablespoons of Diamond Crystal kosher salt. The crystals are different sizes between these 2 kosher salts, and so their volumes yield different amounts of saltiness. You know what I mean? So it's 4.5 tablespoons of the Morton's or 6 tablespoons of the Diamond Crystal. Or if you're using a more normal fine kind of salt, like fine normal table salt, iodized table salt, normal table salt, or fine sea salt, and then you want 3 tablespoons of that. You just mix the salt with that cool water. It takes a moment and you dissolve it in. It will completely dissolve. I like to use something that's clear. I can really tell that it's dissolved then. And as much as I said that adding other flavors doesn't really do very much, some garlic powder will penetrate. I do find onion powder as well. I add those after dissolving the salt because they make the mixture kind of cloudy and you can't tell as well. And it's a tablespoon of one or the other or of both. Now, dry brining is a technique that I use on steaks all the time, and I've used it on turkey as well because you don't have to have a big container of water, you know what I mean? And for the steaks, it's just usually wet brine. We don't want to really change the internal texture of the good quality steak very much, but you do want to bring in some seasoning. So what you're essentially doing is just doing a nice layer of salt on the outside of the meat, and that salt draws a little bit of the liquid of the meat out, and then the meat sucks it back in, but with the salt. And so you get the seasoning more penetrating into the meat. It will change the texture on the outside a little bit, but not as much as the wet brine. But because chicken thighs don't need as much tenderization or as much juiciness as, say, chicken breast requires, I thought it'd be really useful to test the dry brine to see if I liked it better than the wet brine. I did not, though. So I tested chicken thighs, boneless, skinless, in a wet brine for 15 minutes, for 30 minutes, for an hour, for 2 hours, and for 4 hours. And I also tested the chicken thighs sprinkled liberally with salt on both sides and then put on a rack over a pan in the fridge for 1 hour, 2 hours, and for 3 hours. The best, hands down, was the 1 hour wet brine. Even 30 minutes started to add a little bit more tenderness and some nice flavor through there. So like, I swear, if you are getting dinner ready and you know you're having chicken thighs and you have a few other things to do, or you're just getting home from work and you're just going to do a few things before you start making dinner, get the chicken thighs into that wet brine for at least 30 minutes and you're going to have an improved flavor and texture. But if you can leave them for the full hour, that is going to be the best. At the 2-hour point in the wet brine, they were a little bit too salty. Nice texture for sure, but just a little bit too salty for me. If I was doing these like just plain chicken thighs with just some rice and some vegetable and no other sauce, not chopping them up and adding them to anything or anything like that, this would be too overpowering. But if you are having different kind of sauces, or this is going on a salad with, you know, vegetables that don't necessarily have a lot of like saltiness already, then the 2 hours would be fine. But I would say 1 hour is better. Now, the 4-hour test, that was just too much. It was way too salty. I ended up chopping it up and mixing it with mayonnaise for chicken salad and then not seasoning it. And that ended up being pretty good. Like that was fine, but just not my favorite. So 15 minutes wasn't enough. 30 minutes was starting to have a good effect. 1 hour was the best. 2 hours is on the verge of too long, and 4 hours is way too long. As to, are you refrigerating this or not? If you're going between 30 minutes to an hour, you don't have to. Cool tap water, salt, cold chicken from the fridge, that can go in your container on the counter as long as you're not going more than an hour. If you're worried that you might go more than an hour, then just stick that whole thing in the fridge for the whole time. And you could have just put it in the fridge anyways. It's not going to hurt it to stay cold. That's all good. Okay, now for the dry brine. 1 hour with the dry brine, so just salt on the chicken in the fridge. Didn't taste very good. It just tasted like I'd overly salted the chicken and it hadn't like penetrated or done anything to the texture. At 2 hours, there was actually great flavor. They were tender and juicy, not as good as the 1 hour wet brine. And then by 3 hours, they were too salty and not very enjoyable. So 2 hour dry brine is best, but I'm telling you, why would you do that if the 1 hour wet brine is better, you know? And I'll just say that for all of these, you don't rinse them or anything like that before cooking them. You can pat them dry, especially the wet brine ones, just pat them dry with some kitchen towel, but you don't have to rinse them. And in fact, you know, studies have shown that when we rinse meat in the sink, it actually spatters bacteria around our kitchen, which isn't a good idea. So you're better off to just pat it dry with that paper towel and then you're best. And remember not to use any extra salt. Whatever recipe you're going to be using these in, do not add salt. If you're using any kind of seasoning blend, whether one that you've made or a store-bought one, make sure it doesn't contain salt either. Otherwise, with that brine and then the extra salt, that's going to be too much. And I will link to my favorite way to cook boneless, skinless chicken thighs for you. But I will tell you, my favorite way is to get a sheet pan and oil it up a little bit, oil the chicken, and then put it nice side down on the sheet pan. And then you want to set the oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit and put your sheet pan at the lowest possible rack in the oven. Even move the rack as low as you can get it. Then those heat elements are as close to the pan as possible. And they actually brown the chicken thighs. They get really nice and brown underneath, but they're still like a little bit softer on the top because they're not in contact with any high heat. And so then you flip them over to serve them and they're nice and brown and a little bit crunchy and they're still juicy and they're going to be so perfectly seasoned because of the salt. I will put the link to how to brine chicken thighs in the show notes for this podcast episode. Or you can head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there. Everything there is arranged by date, so it's helpful to know that today is June 17th of 2025. Also, if you love my recipes and cooking ideas, I have a great place for you to get more. Head to cookthestory.com/courses, COURSES, and you will see all of my little cooking courses there. You can sign up for them. There's one for like meal planning that's called Rotation Ready Recipes. There's one for Instant Pot. There's one for Air Fryer. You sign up there and you start getting more delicious recipes and ideas in your inbox straight from me. Head to cookthestory.com/courses to sign up now. I am Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, the all new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast recipe of the day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.